Before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before ancient Egypt became the greatest civilization on earth, something else existed here. A forgotten people, lost beneath the sands of time. But what if history erased them? Who really came before Egypt?
3,000 years of uninterrupted civilization. To give you an idea, we've only been around for 2,000 years since the fall of the Roman Empire, and we've already lost count of how many times we've been on the verge of destroying everything. There was something much more fascinating. There were people who were afraid, hungry, ambitious. People who made mistakes and corrected them. People who died.
People who looked at the river and thought, what if we could control it?
If instead of running away from the flood, we harnessed it? That question, that simple question, is where it all began. And today I'm going to tell you what happened before all that, before the pharaohs, before the gods with names and their own temples, before the first hieroglyphics, before anyone even called themselves a king. All starts with the river. Before there was any civilization in this place, before any city, any temple, any proper name engraved in stone, there was the Nile. And the Nile did something that no other river in the world did with such precision and such generosity. It overflowed every year at the same moment, depositing a layer of black mud on the parched desert earth. Not just a little mud, a thick, dark, wet layer full of minerals brought down from the mountains of Ethiopia, the most fertile land in the ancient world, automatically renewed each year, without anyone having to do anything to earn it. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, not because of the color of the night sky or for any mystical reason, because of that mud. Because of that annual gift from the river that made everything possible. And they called the desert that surrounded them Deshret, the Red Land, death, chaos. 2 words, 2 colors, 2 worlds separated by mere meters. And in that narrow strip between life and death emerged the most enduring civilization the world has ever known.
The sun kills you in day.
A civilization that lasted longer than any other in human history. Imagine living in the most hostile desert, nothing for thousands of kilometers in any direction. The cold freezes you at night, and the first humans who saw it, to those who came here fleeing the desert that stretched out around them, it seemed like a miracle. It seemed like a gift from something bigger than themselves. Gratitude mixed with awe was the seed of the entire Egyptian religion. And here's the key that almost no one explains when they talk about Egypt. This country wasn't made possible in spite of the desert. It was made possible because of it. The desert was the natural frontier, more perfect than a people could wish for. To the east, the Sinai Desert. To the west, the Sahara. To the south, cataracts of rock and water that made it impossible to navigate the Nile in that direction. Only to the north lay the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean also had its rules. No one crossed the Sahara for pleasure. No one attacked Egypt from the west. The only serious threats came from the north and the east. And for those, over time, battles ataques. Meanwhile, the rest of the great civilizations of the ancient world, Mesopotamia, the Indus, China, spent enormous amounts of energy defending themselves from all sides. Walls, standing armies, resources invested in survival rather than in creation. The Egyptians, protected by their desert, could devote that energy to something else, to building, to experimenting, to accumulating knowledge from one generation to the next. Without an invasion, destroying everything every 3 centuries. 43 centuries. The desert was not Egypt's enemy, it was its guardian. In 1,000 years before Christ, before any city, before any king, before any names were engraved anywhere, there were people. They didn't live in the valley yet. The Nile at that time was a much wilder, more unpredictable. Floods were not the controlled gift they would later become. They were catastrophic events that could sweep away everything in their path. No one settled in the floodplain if they had another option, and they did. They lived in the highlands on the sides of the valley, on the plains that today form the Western Desert. And at that time, that wasn't desert, it was savannah. Yes. What we call the Sahara today was a completely different place then, with freshwater lakes, pastures of grass, with trees, with animals, buffalo, giraffes, crocodiles, inland hippos in rivers that no longer exist, with human populations living from home and gathering, and who were beginning to experiment adaptively with livestock farming. Saw over the centuries was the change. The lakes were lowering. The grass was retreating. The animals were migrating south, following the receding moisture. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a world disappear. Not all at once, but little by little. Not in dramatic catastrophe, but in silent erosion. The humans who lived in that savannah did not see the end coming. Each generation grew up thinking that the rains that were scarce that year would return the next. And sometimes they did. And that made everything more confusing, slower, harder to take in. Around the year 5000 BC, the process accelerated. The Sahara began to dry up definitively. Thousands of people spread across a savannah that no longer. To the south, the desert advanced equally. Back to the east was the valley, the river, the black earth. They went to the river, and there, in that narrow corridor that suddenly became the only habitable place for hundreds of kilometers, they met other groups. People who had come from the south following the course of the river. People from Sinai and beyond. Different cultures, different languages, different customs, different ways of burying their dead, of decorating their pottery, of understanding the world. But all with the same urging, but are no longer simple decoration. Marks are evolving. They're no longer just decorative elements. They now carry specific meanings for the observer. The first babblings of a visual language. The first steps towards hieroglyphics. Something that will change the way you see hieroglyphics forever. They were not invented for poetry. They were not invented to honor the gods. They were not invented so that the pharaohs could recount their victories on the walls of the temples, although they would later be used for all. Were invented for accounting purposes. Named Gunter Dreyer was excavating a tomb in the city of Abydos in Upper Egypt. Inside that tomb, he found something unexpected that turned out to be the earliest known written symbols from ancient Egypt around 3200 BC. 200 people, a few dozen transactions, a few agreements. After writing, you can manage a kingdom, you can manage an empire. Back of every stone, every tool. Writing, there are no pyramids. It's that they were purely pictographic. A picture of a bird meant bird. A picture of a hand meant. Did not choose between these three systems. They combined them all into one. They used pictograms for the obvious, ideograms for concepts, phonograms for sounds, and they also added determinatives, buses, silent symbols at the end of words that indicated the conceptual category to which they belonged to avoid confusion. It is a complex system, beautiful in its complexity, and that complexity was also its weakness. When the civilization that created it disappeared, no one knew how to read it for 100 years, till 1822, when a young Frenchman named Jean-François wrote at a stone as his key the same text in Greek and hieroglyphs, and the first thing he read clearly on the other side of that ancient conversation was probably something about inventories, taxes, or commercial transactions. A warehouse receipt. Writing always returns to where it began. Upper Egypt lay in the south. where the river is narrow and the banks are mountainous, wedged between limestone and sandstone cliffs. The landscape was starker, more dramatic. Its people were more warlike, with a tradition of local chieftains who imposed themselves by force and who had been competing with each other for centuries for control of the valley's resources. Their symbol was the reed. Their crown was white, tall, iconic. Their tutelary goddess, a completely different territory. Flat, marshy, humid, extraordinarily fertile. In many places, but difficult to control. Fishermen, farmers, traders who arrived by sea from the Mediterranean. A culture more open to the outside world, more accustomed to exchange. Their symbol was papyrus. Their crown was red, flat, with a curious raised spiral front. Papyrus, white crown and red crown, vulture and cobra. Two systems of symbols so different that when they were finally unified, the Egyptians did not choose one. They combined them. The unified pharaoh wore 3,000 years later. The pharaoh was still called Lord of the Two Lands. For centuries, Upper and Lower Egypt coexisted without being unified. They traded. The south had access to the resources of inland Africa, gold, ivory, exotic animals. The north had the Mediterranean and its trade routes. They influenced each other artistically and culturally. They intermarried. Grave goods show a mixture of styles. And the cities of the south that controlled the river also fought controlling the flow of goods to the north. Those of the north that controlled the delta controlled access to the sea. The tension between the two poles was permanent. Egypt was not an accident. It was mud, desert, and thousands of years of people who learned to use both. Without that river, there are no pharaohs. Without those invisible centuries of pre-dynastic cultures, there are no pyramids. Without that warehouse receipt in the UJ tomb, there is nothing of what comes after.